So I was watching Lama talk about the aggregates and the self, and I was thinking about um, the different ways of looking at things. I adhere to a fairly nihilistic way of looking at it, like it doesn't much, it matters, but it doesn't matter. Um, and that um, okay, so I was just reading I finished reading the 10 Wheels of Shittigarbha. I've been reading sutras and stuff that are you know, works of the Buddha, somehow or another presented in this world. And they have a different nature than when I was trying to read Karl Brunholz's coverage of Patrul Rinpoche. Um, Whether or not it was Longchenpa or Tsongkhapa who wrote the original text and all of that sort of stuff. I eventually set it down, probably through delusion, because it just didn't seem like I was getting traction in the text, and I get a little extra frustrated with Karl Brunholz, which is, I still think that that has to do with he presents the information a little bit differently than what I'm used to, I guess, is what it is. Um, and I'm trying to become more passive about that so that I could benefit. I've read the books that I bought from him, but I was trying to reread them to see, after having read more things and matured for several more months, maybe another year, to see if I was able to follow the text a little bit more, but I was still having some of the same issues. But I was just reading about, or listening to this Lama talk about the self and the non-self, and so I was just reading these sutras in which the Buddha says, you know, this was my previous incarnation, this was the right, and I was having the thought how we think about it is that not everyone has a self, but some people do. Um, Sometimes there are energies that are focused through that accumulations of staining and bending of atoms in the world systems in which there are atoms, and the Abhidharma is meaningful because there are world systems in which it is not. And that in the world systems in which it is meaningful, that the atoms can and the aggregates can accumulate, can coalesce around things that are not selves, and continue with so we talk about the continuum. You know, bless my continuum. I made the atoms, whatever the atoms and aggregates all came together to move wind and to make movement and to make the sound that we heard, that bless my continuum. And the continuum is what came before, what's happening now, what's happening afterwards. And so this Lama is talking about purification, dedication, things like that, and in a very Gelugpa kind of way. And I like listening to the different schools and their different attitudes towards the different ways of doing things. And I was reading about Nyingma Gelugpa collaboration, which my guru had been involved with, and at various points, not in everything, but there were times when he was. And there were times when I was studying a more Gelugpa way, and there were times when I was studying a more Nyingma way, and there was times when I was studying a more Bon way. But I was told when I was dead that I did have a self, but that not everyone does. And as far as how to reconcile this with the Buddhist teaching, is that it was not beneficial to everybody to think about this, but that the Buddhist teaching applies to people of specific color markings, people of specific, like they think of people like me as being Dharmapalas. That the Dharmapalas have red hair, they have unusual colored eyes, they're unusual colors, whereas the Buddhas are not this discolored. And that as protectors of the Dharma, we might have different characteristics that are outside of the Dharma. Now, why do we protect the Dharma when we exhibit characteristics that don't apply to the Dharma? It's because, for one thing, for those beings that it does apply to, it causes them to engage in better behavior. It causes them to think about different things. As far as the cessation of the world, the ultimate cessation of the world, I was told that just really isn't going to happen in terms of, well, we're going to see the end of the world, for example, and we've talked about the world meaning the Mediterranean region as far as Iran. North Africa to Persia to most of Europe, and the end of the world as we know it, the end of the world, Armageddon, things like that. When we start to see things of that nature, we start to understand more what was being said to us, that somehow we have included things in stuff that doesn't make a lot of difference, doesn't really belong in the set of meaning, and that outside of that things happen, and that we need similitudes of what is outside of the understood, what is outside of the context that makes things meaningful. So they have that in Buddhism. They have that understanding that the Dharma of the Buddha applies in the multi-flowered world, and that there might be other Buddha worlds, but not every world is a Buddha world. And so you can be born not just outside of the six realms, or not just outside of the human realm, but you could be reborn outside of the six realms in a place where things are broke down differently. Now, do you segue into that through a hell situation? Well, if what is the consciousness that is attached to your aggregates, which may or may not be considered a self, depending on, the different markings and things, if those things don't, transfer to some place that's comprehensible to any of the accumulation that it has, it's probably going to be incomprehensible in a manner that's like an unrelenting hell. How many eons or units of time or units of existence are going to transpire before any of that changes? Do you filter all the way to the bottom of some greater vessel, and within which there is one Buddha sitting among many other beings, and we are merely one atom within the palm of his one hand? And that one atom is the trichiliocosm. No, the entire multi-flowered world system comprising many trichiliocosms. So you see that there is a large amount of variation in what is comprehensible to us, but there's also a much greater amount even within the Buddha that is not comprehensible to us, and that there is that which is outside of the Buddha. Because we're being given this image of, there were many Tathagatas, there were many, so to give us the idea, that, there's a number of Tathagatas is equal to the number of sands in the Ganges, and if there were a number of Ganges equal to the number of sands in the Ganges, and then that much sand again. So, and yet we are responsible for such a tiny amount that we can focus on very simple things and be safe and secure in our amount of time, in our amount of place. And that what is self? What is self in that, am I the same now as I was 10 minutes ago, having experienced different things, having had thoughts that the person I was 10 minutes ago hadn't had, having experiences? Are you the same person you were 10 minutes ago? Do you want those 10 minutes back? That kind of thing. So, as far as some of these arguments, they're not even worth having.